Hi everyone and welcome to my project-based learning presentation. So as Howard previously mentioned during his introduction on his presentation, we have decided to work on this project together. We decided to split the workload, so we went ahead and evenly focused on our own chapters of the textbook. We both split chapter 3 and I solely focused on chapter 4 while he focused on just chapter 5. So let's just get right into it and begin with chapter 3, titled Imagining the Possibilities. This chapter mainly focuses on the conceptual framework for establishing a project. After reviewing this chapter, I felt like the most important key point was project planning, which is considered to be, in other words, the first step. Project planning is part of project management, which relates to the use of schedules such as Gantt charts to plan and subsequently report progress within the project environment. Initially, the project scope is defined and the appropriate methods for completing the project are determined. So, figuring out what is most important depending on the curriculum is really important. Another key point in which I was able to focus on was figuring out what is most important. For example, it is important to always go back to the Common Core standards on whatever the project or lesson may be so that you are sure you hit every standard and you allow your students to understand the well thought out ideas that you have for them for that lesson. One thing that also really stood out to me in chapter 3 was the question, what is the big idea? In other words, what big ideas, core concepts, or processes are the most important when developing a project? Therefore, it is important that teachers must certainly always review the curriculum standards and ask themselves, what is the purpose of this? Why are you teaching this lesson? What is the purpose for this lesson? Or what are the common core standards that students will be able to walk away from this lesson? Always ask yourself, what do all these standards ultimately add up to? Or by the end of this lesson, what will my students have gained from this project? Creating a wiki will be a great idea for teachers to manage a website to add content which can be used for planning and managing projects. No matter the size of the project, planning must always be a necessity. Always establish well thought out ideas before starting any project. Overall, I feel that this chapter has really helped me understand the conceptual frameworks of how to establish a project when working with the classroom. Continuing on with a little bit more on chapter 3, another part that I focused on was the planning for rigor. So this image you see here is the Bloom's categories of objectives, also known as the Bloom's taxonomy. This here is seen as ways in which we learn or ways in understanding the needed requirements on creating a well-prepared project for students in the 21st century. This pyramid here shows the ways in which we learn. We first create, evaluate, analyze, apply, understand, and remember. So first is creating. We first create our original work. For example, students can put elements together to form functional whole products or point of view. For example, we can also assemble, generate, construct, design, develop, formulate, rearrange, rewrite, organize, and devise. We then justify a stand or decision, such as appraise, argue, defend, judge, select, support, evaluate, debate, measure, select, test, and verify. Third, we analyze. The student can distinguish between parts, how they relate to each other, and to the overall structure and purpose. We compare, contrast, criticize, differentiate, discriminate, question, classify, distinguish, and experiment. We also apply. The student can use information in a new way, such as demonstrating, dramatize, interpret, solve, use, illustrate, convert, and prepare. And students understand, which they can construct meaning from oral, written, and graphic messages, such as interpret, exemplify, classify, summarize, compare, explain, paraphrase, and discuss. And finally, remember. The student can recognize and recall relevant knowledge from long-term memory, such as define, duplicate, list, memorize, repeat, and reproduce. So this brings us to the section of this chapter, which are the essential learning functions. So some essential learning functions that will help us reach the goals that are previously mentioned are as listed. Number one is ubiquity, which is learning inside and outside the classroom. For example, making sure that students are always engaged and thinking and asking the question, why? Number two is deep learning, which is going beyond filtered information. For example, not just finding out the answer to a question, but going further with the investigation and figuring out why that answer was answered the way it was. Number three, making things visible and discussable. Number four, expressing ourselves, sharing ideas with one another, and building a community. For example, taking a project further than just inside the classroom and exploring with other students and other classrooms and collaborating with one another. Number five, collaboration, such as teaching and learning with other students from different classrooms. Number six, research. For example, using internet, tablets, such like that. Number seven, project management. As I mentioned before, make sure you are prepared and aware of all the Common Core standards before starting a lesson. And finally, key function number 8, reflection and iteration. At the end of every lesson or project, make sure that every student understands and knows why they had to learn the material, as well as making sure that they understand the lesson and no one ever gets left behind. Okay, so this takes us into chapter 4, strategies for discovery. So this chapter mainly focused on the overall selecting and designing of a project and looked at the pathway of incorporating those ideas into the learning environment. For example, after gathering ideas on a project, one must always review each idea while making sure that the students understand what is being asked. One must look closely if the ideas gathered work together within the platform of the project. One must critically think and oversee the project's pitfalls. After reviewing these pitfalls, one must continuously look over the project to see if there are other ways to improve the piece of work. Some potential pitfalls might include assessment in which may not feel authentic, or long on activities and short of the learning outcomes. On the other hand, some qualities of the best project might include projects that are structured so that students learn with and from each other, students that learn by doing hands-on activities and projects, therefore have students do hands-on activities, and lastly, projects that capture students' interest through complex and compelling real-life and stimulated experiences. Overall, I feel that it is really important that you make sure that the quality of your learning outcomes match the qualities of your activities that are incorporated into your classroom to create a well-flourishing environment for your students to succeed in. So the main focus on Chapter 5 was to focus on helping us invest our time wisely to design and engage our students in the working process within a project. Initially, as any other project, we must first gather information and resources. At the beginning of any project, no matter the subject, we must look at the resource in hand as well as other resources that are available by outsiders, such as internet or books. Milestones and deadlines. This chapter also talked about these items. So I think that when we have a project for our students, we should definitely implement time management skills to our students. I think that this is very important and is a main key when trying to reach milestones and deadlines for when you are planning any project. Time planning. This is also important to be a team player. The overall success of the work highly depends on team planning. If a project does not come together as expected, it is resulted that the team lacked in oriented skills. Also, I think that if you plan to implement technology into your classroom, such as when working on projects, it is important to establish rules. For example, number 1, if you really need it. And 2, ask if your students have used this type of technology before, or is this their first time using it? It could literally be anything. A website, an application online. I believe that as teachers, we should definitely do research and see if these technology tools work and see if this is going to benefit our students. We also have to see if this even might be a little confusing or even tricky for some students so that we can switch that out and incorporate other methods that will benefit them as well as them being able to understand what we are asking for. Continuing a little bit more with Chapter 5, which is planning for assessment. So first off, a manageable assessment plan will typically focus on 3 to 5 goals. In the book, it focuses on these 5 right here, which are monitoring, observing, interacting, analyzing, and reporting. A project usually requires these multiple assessment methods. In this case, assessment planning is an integral part of instruction as it determines whether or not the goals of education are being met. Assessment affects decisions about grades, placement, advancement, instructional needs, curriculum, and, in some cases, funding. Assessment inspires us to ask these hard questions, such as, are we teaching what we think we are teaching? Are students learning what they are supposed to be learning? Is there a way to teach the subject better, thereby promoting better learning? Today's students need to know that not only the basic reading and arithmetic skills, but also skills that will allow them to face a world that is continually changing. They must be able to think critically, to analyze, and to make inferences. Changes in the skills base and knowledge our students need require new learning goals. These new learning goals change the relationship between assessment and instruction. Overall, I strongly believe that teachers need to take an active role in making decisions about the purpose of assessment and the content that is being assessed. Reinventing project-based learning offers educators an accessible guide for maximizing the benefits of project-based learning in today's technology learning environment. Our textbook solely speaks directly to educators, administrators, and professional development specialists who want to transform learning into a more active, student-driven experience using technology tools for inquiry, collaboration, and connection to the world beyond the classroom. Well, this concludes my presentation on the overall findings that I was able to grasp from our textbook. Hope you all enjoyed and thanks for listening. Until next time.